Welcome to our third monthly Lake Org Chat. As an outreach program of the College of Natural Resources at UW-Stevens Point, our goal is to provide educational resources and support to the broader community in regard to lake health. As you may know, Wisconsin is home to over 15,000 lakes, and over 750 of these lakes have an organization that protects and manages the health of the lake for current and future generations. We try to get important and timely information out in a variety of ways. And this year, we're recording these monthly Lake Org chats to get this information out to you in an engaging way. Please let us know how we're doing by completing the feedback survey listed in YouTube. We hope you'll join us for future episodes. The tentative topics are listed here on the slide. In this episode, we'll be discussing how to plan for the annual meeting. So much fun. My name is Sarah Winju, and I'm the Leadership and Capacity Development Specialist for the Extension Lakes program at UW-Stevens Point, and I'll be helping to facilitate these chats each month.
And I'm Eric Olson. I'm the Director of Extension Lakes, and I'm also going to be helping to facilitate the conversations. We also like to bring in people who are involved in lake organizations to share their perspective and experiences with us. It makes it, I think, all the more interesting, and you get to learn from each other. And that's part of what we've been trying to do at Extension Lakes for a long time. So I'm going to introduce Dave Quady. Dave.
Thanks, Eric. I'm honored to represent Sand Lake Association and its membership. Sand Lake is in Rusk County, Wisconsin. It's one of many Sand Lakes, but we're the one in Rusk County and Chippewa County. Also the proud graduate or a proud graduate of the Lake Leaders Institute Crew 15, and a member of the Capacity Committee through the university. Sandy?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sandy Campbell. I'm the president of Long Lake Preservation Association. Long Lake is located at the southern part of Washburn County, and we are truly a long lake. I know there are others, but we're a 16-mile long lake.
Thank you both, Dave and Sandy, for joining us. And I invited Sandy too because the very first annual meeting I went to was a Long Lake Preservation Association annual meeting all the way back in, I think, 2001. So 24 years ago, I started going to Lake Association meetings. If you want to go to the next slide. Really just an overview here of what we're going to talk about. The annual meeting, maybe this sounds like a boring topic, but it is sort of a core activity really of any organization, a lake association or a lake district. You kind of have to plan for this and make sure it goes well. So just, you're seeing some of the questions we're going to cover. You may already know that having an annual meeting involves this type of planning, but we're hoping this discussion helps you. We also know that you might be new to your organization. Maybe you were newly appointed to be the secretary, and it's your responsibility to put the annual meeting together. And there could be a chance that nobody handed off good notes to you about how to do this. So we wanted to just bring in some people that had some experience and share some insights. Grab the next slide. So, why? Why an annual meeting? Some of the reasons why we do this is because you kind of have to do this. Whether you're a lake association or a lake district, there probably is some requirement to hold an annual meeting. Oftentimes is related to how you get new board members on your board, your lake association board of directors or your lake district board of commissioners. That kind of has to happen through an annual meeting. So there's this sort of this understanding that thou shalt do this. But there's also like the benefits of doing this, bringing people together, connecting with each other, talking about your accomplishments, getting feedback on how the group is doing. Those are also things that you can accomplish at an annual meeting. If you don't do this well, or if attendance drops off, I think your organization just starts to get weaker over time. And it gets harder to even just recruit new members and to keep things going. So when we think about this is part of what Sarah and I have been working on, and Dave mentioned sort of our capacity building, organizational capacity building. Having good annual meetings is a good part of how you sort of strengthen your organization over time. So we're going to talk about some nuts and bolts and details, but basically you just understand that in the case of a lake district, for example, you have to have this annual meeting to approve a budget. And so it's a requirement. We'll go to the next slide, and you're gonna hear us reference bylaws now and again throughout this talk, throughout the chat, and I want to make a clear distinction here. Lake associations do have bylaws. They pretty much have to have bylaws, and Extension Lakes, we provide a model of bylaws, but each lake association gets to tweak them and make them a little different for their specific purposes. And people ask me sometimes, oh, lake districts, do we have bylaws? And I usually say no, you don't have or need bylaws. You should instead be referring to Chapter 33 of Wisconsin statutes. And if you're not familiar with Chapter 33, this is the now 51-year-old law that sets up a framework for creating lake districts as local units of government. And it kind of spells out how you're going to operate, even down to the details of how to schedule and hold your annual meeting. So we really recommend, again, making sure everyone understands which type of group you are. But if you're a lake association, you're going to refer to your specific bylaws. And if you're a lake district, you might want to refer right to Chapter 33. And we might even show you real quick here what Chapter 33 looks like. So if you were to go online and just Google search Wisconsin Chapter 33 statutes, you'll probably get to this little piece of webpage. This is the state legislature's webpage. They are the keeper of the laws of the state of Wisconsin. And it's basically everything you're seeing here is the exact language of Chapter 33. And specifically 33.30 talks about the annual meeting, but there's other even cross references to other parts of statute. What we recommend you do, because we tell lake associations to bring their bylaws, we recommend lake district people bring Chapter 33. So you can print this. If you just click on that little Adobe PDF thingy up there, you'll see it's about a 16-page document when it's now formatted for good printing. Just print this sucker off. You'll see up at the top there, it kind of talks about when it was last updated. And at the very top, it says April 2nd, 2025. You know, that's not today. That just means that the legislature is continuously updating these records to make sure that it's the most recent version. So printing this and bringing it to your annual meeting for a lake district, that'll help you kind of stay on track. And again, the next slide here talks more about bylaws, just some pointers here, and we'll bring Dave and Sandy into the conversation here. The lake association bylaws are sort of your version of state statutes. It's your operating rules that you're supposed to abide by. So some questions to ask yourself kind of out here on the slide. You know, do you know where your bylaws are? Do you know how they get amended? Do you know how they get updated? Dave, I think you had to go through some recent updates to your bylaws, right? At an annual meeting?
Yep. So we, several years ago, we had bylaws that dictated that we had to send things out via the United States Postal Service, meeting notifications, any potential changes that we would have to our bylaws, and our structure of our board, actually. And so we have changed those over the years to kind of bring technology in for distribution of our meeting notifications. We use our website, we use Facebook, and we use email to do that. And so those things were not in our bylaws as acceptable. The other things that we always make sure are up to date in the bylaws is when we're having those meetings. And our bylaws aren't, we have them on a specific day, but we have them 3 times a year. We have a spring meeting, our annual meeting, and a fall meeting, and then other meetings as required by the board or the association members. So yep, we've had to do a fair number of revisions to kind of keep up with the quote changing times of how you distribute information.
And the language I have up here where it says Article X, adoption and amendments, this is just drawn from the model bylaws that we provide in our guide, People of the Lakes. It's found in the appendix, and you can download copies of this if you needed to start out with Lake Association bylaws. But the underlying point is to notice that you can't just show up at an annual meeting oftentimes and say, hey, let's change the bylaws. People need to be aware that the bylaws are going to be looked at and that there's going to be maybe a change. So it says here, proposed amendments must be summarized in the notice for the annual meeting in which the amendments are to be voted on. So that's to notify people. That means you got a plan. You have to get your ducks in a row and be ready for that annual meeting.
Right.
Yep. So one example, we normally just do our bylaw updates or revisions at the annual meeting, like Eric said, but we had to change our bylaws to allow anybody to become a member of the association. It used to be landowners on the lake. And because of DNR requirements to obtain grants, you have to allow anyone to be a member. It has to be an open association. So anyone can pay dues and become a member. And so our bylaws did not have that. So we had to have kind of a quote emergency meeting so that we would qualify for DNR grants. And we did that, and it was a public meeting, and we updated the bylaws, but we did send those bylaw changes out probably around 30 days in advance. I don't remember exactly, it was a couple of years ago, but around 30 days in advance. And then we took action at a meeting.
That's a great point, Dave. So the point on here about what a qualified lake association is, this is the notion that the state of Wisconsin does cost share projects with local lake associations, but only if they meet certain standards. So if it was a private club, if it was just 5 or 6 people around the lake who were raising money to stock fish, that might not quite qualify. But if you're an open lake association that allows people to become members, then you're eligible to receive this type of state funding. And lake districts, in contrast, because they're local units of government, they're actually automatically eligible to receive cost share money. They were the original group that would receive cost share money. And it was only really since the 1980s that the DNR thought through, okay, how are we going to let lake associations participate in cost share funding as well? So those standards are there. That includes other things too, like your dues. You can't charge less than $5 or more than $50 and be a qualified lake association. And your number of members, you have to have at least 25 members. So again, that limits it from being those really small, cliquey type clubs.
Right. Yeah, and our bylaws are specific but vague enough to give us some flexibility on when we hold our annual meeting. So we say during the month of May or June, with the precise time and place to be set by the board of directors, although it's typically in the exact same place. So but we do specify, and I know Dave mentioned membership and who can join, and our bylaws do indicate that it's any the association is open to any individual, family, business, or organization that subscribes to the purposes of the association.
Yeah, that's great. That's a real open way. You'll find in the guidance for qualified lake association that if you want to, you can limit it to people who reside or own land within a mile of the lake. And all that's meant to do is to keep it from just being a shoreland owner organization. But when I answer people's questions about this, I always say, like, well, try and kick it open, make it available for anyone who does, like Sandy said, subscribes to what you're trying to accomplish. They can join and become a member.
Right.
We'd love to see more people be members, and then of course we'd love to see more people come to your annual meeting.
Exactly.
And Sandy, you mentioned the location too, and that's a good lead into the next slide, because we want to talk about, like, where the heck do you do this and when. You mentioned the dates, kind of being flexible, but typically these lake groups want to meet in the summer, right? It wouldn't make sense to meet in January.
Right. So we met for a long time on Memorial Day, and we recently changed to the week after. We felt that folks came up and wanted to be getting their boats in and were busy with family on Memorial Day. So that late May date seems to be successful for us. And we're in the morning, 9 a.m. We tell people how long the meeting will be. It's usually hour and a half. And we do serve refreshments. I see that coming up. So coffee, we have kind of a set menu that we do. And we're lucky that half of our lake is part of the Scouts. So we're at Tomahawk Scout Camp every summer.
Yeah. And we do 2 meetings, one in the spring and one in the fall. And we do those Labor Day, Memorial Day weekends, although we do them on Saturday morning. And we've heard from our membership, let's try to keep that to an hour, hour and a half for those two meetings. And because people they're there to go and enjoy their lake and their friends and things like that. So we try to be very specific on our times also, nail those down. And then our annual meeting, and we do those at our town hall. And we're lucky enough to have a town hall that's very close to our lake. Everybody knows where it is. It's easy to get to. And oh, by the way, that's also garbage day and recycling day, which are also at the town hall. So you can kill two birds with one stone. And then our annual meetings are always hosted. We find a volunteer family on the lake to host it. And our annual meetings are, they're very well attended, but we don't have refreshments like Sandy does at the non-annual meeting, but we have an informal brunch where people bring food and then the association provides a certain part of that food, the coffee, the juice, that kind of stuff. And then everyone else brings something to share. And that helps us build that community that we're also looking for from our membership.
You both bring up good points about location, and that's why we named the slide location, location, location. If you're lucky enough to have a public space to go to, obviously that's a great place. People are welcome. It's like a neutral place. Hopefully there are adequate restrooms. We all also need to think about accessibility of the location so people can access the space. Is there enough room to hold everyone that you're hoping will come to the annual meeting? Is there adequate parking? So lots of different things to think about when it comes to location. And also, do you have to make reservations? I think you mentioned that ahead of time to reserve the space. Is it even available on the weekend that you want to do this? So this is something that might take, months ahead, or maybe even the year before to make these reservations so you can utilize that space. Some lakes, like we have here, is Post Lake. They have their own facility that they can utilize for these events. So it's really nice to be able to have that location. Something that I don't think we've talked about is people participating remotely. So is that something that you allow at your annual meetings? Is if they're not able to be there in person, can they at least participate virtually? And if so, does that location allow that to happen? So I'm wondering if either of you have had that.
So it's at Sand Lake during COVID, yes, absolutely. We did all of our meetings via remote access and like Zoom or Teams or whatever. We have now switched to in-person, and actually our bylaws require in-person voting. So we don't do remote anymore for any of our meetings. We were asked to do that by a member that actually lives on the West Coast, and we don't have good internet necessarily where we're hosting these meetings. And so we just kind of went, sorry. And our bylaws dictate to vote, you have to be there. There's no absentee voting. There's no remote voting allowed. Certainly we could address that if it was a desire, but no one in our particular association has requested that past COVID. How about you, Sandy?
Yeah, no, we don't. I don't think we did remote, although we did make everything accessible via our website. So the slides that we showed, people could go and look at those. And then throughout the summer, excuse me, we had sort of mini meetings around the lake. So if you missed the annual meeting, you could get caught up on the information at one of those smaller social events.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's important to talk about those that couldn't attend. How do you then follow up with them afterwards and make sure that they get the information? And I think we'll get to that after a few more slides. So yeah, location, a very important thing to think about. Eric, did you have anything to add about this?
Yeah, I just point out, Chapter 33 again is your guide for lake districts, and they do require secret ballot elections for commissioners. And so that makes it pretty much impossible to really participate remotely. That was really a struggle during the COVID times. But I think even now people say, well, why can't I remote participate? And it has to have that secret ballot. And we do recommend that you can broadcast the meeting. You can share it with people that way. But there's no real good mechanism for direct participation. And Chapter 33, just like what Dave was saying, Chapter 33 prohibits absentee ballots and proxy voting. So you have to plan around for that annual meeting. That's why it's a big deal. That's why it's important.
All right, so you have the space reserved, you know where it's going to be. How do you get people there?
Yeah, it is important to try to get as many people as possible to your annual meeting, I think. When we think about those lake districts, I mean, it can sound like it's a boring thing, like it's just a government meeting, but lake districts are unique because it's direct democracy. It's actual, voters get to say not only on who's going to be on the board, but as you'll see in a bit, they're going to vote on the actual budget. So we try to maximize how many people go there. And what the law requires for Chapter 33 is that you need to contact all the people that are eligible to vote. You have to send them the agenda and the budget that's going to be addressed. And the statute says, really, initially, you should be trying to hard copy mail that, like through the Postal Service, to everybody who owns property in the district and everybody who resides in the district. So that sets sort of a schedule for sending out mail and noticing the annual meeting. There was a recent change in law that does allow people to opt in to get notified by email. In our last episode, we talked a bit about different ways that a lake district could use email, but we still want to make sure you notify as many people as possible and get the word out that way. You can also host it you can post it on your webpage, you can post it on a Facebook page, but those are supplemental ways to notify the meeting. And because it's a government meeting, you have to post it in public places as well, similar to the way your town or village or city might post their regular meetings. So you have to post it as a government meeting. But that's not the only way to get the word out. There's other ways, right? It should be featured in your newsletter and your email communications. We're just reminding people of this wheel of communication that we also talked about in our last chat. This one is pegged on the idea that the annual meeting is in May, but it doesn't have to be in May. It could be in June, July, August. That just sets your schedule so you're thinking ahead of time, like, okay, we've got to make sure that we start letting people know about the annual meeting well in advance. And again, that would apply whether you're a lake district or a lake association, just thinking ahead and letting people know what you have to do. Sandy, I put up this sign here. This is a fake Long Lake Preservation Association sign, but it's meant to represent sort of what you all do. Talk a bit about how you guys use yard signs to make sure people are aware.
Yeah, we spread them around the lake. Sometimes a homeowner will keep their sign and put it out. We also have one person that's in charge of collecting them and putting them out ahead of the meeting, so that the week preceding the meeting, they appear around the lake, and it's a good reminder. And we also use them on the morning of the meeting. I think we even have a different set that has an arrow pointing which way to drive to our location, because it is a little bit remote. And this will have already been advertised in our newsletter, on our calendar, annual calendar, and also Facebook page and website. But the yard signs were great.
This is a really, I think, unique example. I love it. There's also probably other things that others are doing across the state too. So if you're doing something, those that are listening, if you're doing something really interesting or that actually works, let us know what you do so that we can share it with others. I know some organizations have their neighborhood captains or certain representatives that actually even go door to door. They have those people that are social and they want to just get the word out. So they go to door and have those conversations.
I personally get on a lot of email lists. I get on lake organization email lists on purpose, and I get sent some of these notices. And I noticed there's the Eagle River Chain of Lakes, I think it's called. They actually send out an email noticing the meeting, but also including an RSVP button, because they want to get a handle on, it's not going to be completely accurate, but they want to get a feel for how many people to expect. And I talked to them ahead of this meeting. they get over 200 people to come to their annual meeting. So that type of attendance sets up some really challenging logistics in terms of how are you going to get ready for the meeting.
All right, well, let's talk about other things that you need to get ready for the meeting. And knowing the number of people would be helpful when you're preparing food or beverages or name tags and all of the other things listed on this slide. So we recommend having a checklist, something that you can refer to year after year after year, and obviously you'll add things and take things away. But so we have a lot of things listed here, but what else, Sandy? I know you have a checklist. What is on your checklist, or what do you make sure that you are ready for before that meeting? And you are muted.
Needed to get some name tags because that's something that we always think of at the very last minute. So I'm glad it's on the checklist. But we are pretty specific. We've gotten that way about food and beverages and how much and what we use and what doesn't get used. And then it's helpful, whoever's organizing that, to write down what worked for you, what was left, how much coffee did you make. And then again, thinking of the details like extension cords, projectors, and making sure those things are in working order before your meeting. We post our agendas so it's on a screen, so we don't have paper copies. We've gotten away from plastic water bottles, styrofoam, so we try and make our annual meeting food-wise at least eco-friendly.
Yeah. And we have a small committee that handles our annual meeting, and it's a small group of people that have that checklist and say, okay, who's going to be assigned to do the coffee and who's going to be assigned. We make hot dishes for breakfast, and so we have people that do that, and that committee really does make sure, like Sandy, you said about the name tags. It was like, oh, well, thank goodness there's an easy way to order new name tags because we just checked it and the annual meeting is in 3 days. And so things like that. And they, to Sarah's point, or maybe it was Sandy, but whatever, every single year they look at that and they go, okay, last year we had X number of people attend. We should plan for that. If we get more or less, then we will record that down every single year and then either grow or shrink depending on what the need is at that annual meeting.
So you definitely need someone, that detail-oriented person to go through this and make sure that there are cups or there are forks and napkins and all those little details that others might not think about. And it's good, like you mentioned, Dave, to have a committee, a whole team that thinks about that, if you're lucky enough to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yep.
And the second and third bullet point here is sort of about, this is a chance to obviously get people to show that they've renewed their membership. If it's a lake association, maybe have the membership roll. Like you said, Dave, if you have to be a member to vote, there has to be a way to verify that these people are members. So you're doing that. In the case of lake districts, there's usually a printed copy of the property tax roll. It's the same list that you would have used as a lake district to mail out the notice of the meeting. And you can check people in based on the property tax roll. There can also be people who are eligible to vote, maybe because they live there, or maybe their name just doesn't show up on the property tax roll, but they own property. They also get to vote, but somebody has to check them in. So it does help to have a good process just for receiving people coming into the annual meeting.
Yeah, and it's one of our primary ways people pay for their dues. We allow people to pay online through our website. They can mail their dues into our treasurer, but most people bring their checks or their cash to our annual meeting, and that's when we get our biggest jump in monies that come in from our membership.
Yeah, we had that system in place, and then we noticed people, we typically have like 90 people coming, so we couldn't ask them to pay that day, or we did, but we didn't want a big line at the door.
Sure.
So another thing we do is remind people, don't wait in line, send in your membership ahead of the meeting, just to avoid the backup of checking people in.
Good idea.
So the next slide is just kind of about the agenda. How specific do you have to be? How specific should you be? I'll tell you that lake districts, again, don't get a whole lot of latitude. There's certain things that kind of have to be on the agenda. So refer back to chapter 33. Again, we have our guide, People of the Lakes, online for free. You can take a look at sort of operating a lake district, and there's a whole section that talks about setting up the agenda for the annual meeting. You have to comply with those standards. And you also can't put, because it's a local government, you can't put vague things on the agenda. Things have to be relatively specific. So you can't just say plant harvester, right? You'd have to have something like decision whether or not to purchase a plant harvester. That's a little bit more specific so people know what's actually going to be decided on the agenda. And governments have been called out for failing to be specific enough in their agenda. So if you're really worried about it, you can contact our office and we'll try and clarify just how specific you have to be. But you can't have really vague things on the agenda, and they can't just pop up at the annual meeting because it has to be noticed on the agenda. Lake associations, however, you get more flexibility, right? That's sort of the benefit, if you will, of being a lake association. You're not stuck in chapter 33.
Yeah, in our annual meetings, actually all of our meetings where we do our agendas, there we have the basic template, right? Every single meeting includes budget, finances, membership, what grants we might be working on. It's kind of listed on this slide. And then what are our key objectives for that particular meeting, because they will vary. And our annual meeting is also, and we talked about this a little bit in the presentation, is where we elect our board members. And so that one is always very key. We do every 2 years, we do re-elections for board members. And so those things are posted on our website. We send it out via email, on Facebook. We use Facebook also to make sure everyone understands, hey, this is what we're going to talk about at the annual meeting. And then we have that kind of the other at the very end for any comments made back from our membership that they want the board to understand is a concern, or they want the board to investigate. For some reason, an example of that was we weren't having, the loons weren't having successful babies. And so they wanted to understand what's going on with our loon population and how come the loons aren't having babies. And so a little subcommittee was created to go try to figure out if there was anything we could do to help our loon babies, or the parents in this case, have babies. And so those kind of things are in that kind of that other section. And then we also want to be extremely respectful of people's time at the lake, and understanding that the association is part of why they're a member, right? Or part of why they have property on the lake, but it's not the only reason. And so we try to keep our agendas to a specific time. And if we find we're going long, or if we have a side topic that we feel we need to discuss further, but we're under time constraints, we will parking lot that and bring it up at the next meeting.
Yeah, and we have an agenda that runs similar to our board meeting. So we'll have the financials, committee reports. The difference is then there's an election. We always ask our first responders to come, and we make a donation to them. So that's part of our annual gift giving option. And so they might say a few words to the membership. And we've started having a speaker so that whatever topic or project we're working on, the speaker is going to address with more specificity.
Yeah, and as we mentioned too, as Dave mentioned, elections of board members can be a big thing, leadership board. The next slide talks about sort of that election process. So this is something that, if you're a lake district, again, there's very specific rules in chapter 33 that are going to spell out how you're going to hold an election. In fact, there's been recent changes made to deal with what if it's a close election. So you have to follow those, how you handle the ballots and store the ballots. So again, printing out a copy of Chapter 33 and going through the annual meeting section is a good reminder for lake districts. Lake districts, ironically, don't really have a quorum requirement for the annual meeting. Because it's not easy to know how many people are even eligible voters in a lake district because it's tied to property ownership. There's no real practical way to set a quorum number. So this is why we do encourage, again, just trying to get as many people as possible, because whoever does show up, those are the people that can set your tax rates for the future years. Now, for lake associations, you might have quorum requirements, right, in your bylaws?
Yep. Yeah, we do. And ours is 1/12 of the members or a minimum of 6. And so yes, we do have very specific, and but it's not like 2/3 or something like that, which would be very hard to do in some of our meetings, but yep.
Sandy, have you ever had a concern? Has anybody said, do we have a quorum of people here to vote on a board member?
No, we usually have a pretty well-attended meeting, and I'm just looking to see if we have a special, I know for board members, we have a quorum amount, but usually we're at least 75 people at an annual meeting, if not closer to 100.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, if you have those high numbers, it's not a problem. If you're struggling to get those people, that's where it becomes an issue. So always good to think, again, review your bylaws. If you're a lake association, make sure people understand what that threshold is, because someone might ask the question at the annual meeting.
Yeah, I guess for an annual meeting, we're at 1/5 of the members, or at least 6 members.
There you go, 6.
Yeah.
And then do you guys collect ballots at lake association meetings? Is it show of hands? What is your practice?
We do show
Yeah,
of
ours is, yeah, sorry, Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we're show of hands.
Yeah, same, show of hands.
Great. At Lake District annual meetings for the election of the board, you do have to use a secret ballot. So you have to have those prepared ahead of time. Part of the planning, I think you need to do here. And then for the budget, oftentimes it is just a show of hands vote. With Lake Districts, it's unique because that budget, when it comes to the annual meeting, can actually be amended at the annual meeting by the people who can vote on the budget. So it can get edited on the fly. That can get pretty tricky. I've seen a number of different ways to do that. Sometimes people bring a spreadsheet to the meeting and make the edits on the fly, but just think ahead, and people who've gone to the Lake District annual meeting in the past probably know how that gets handled, but just be planning ahead. And speaking of budget, that might be something that a lake association does talk about or gets a report out. But for a lake district, the budget is kind of one of the main shows for that annual meeting. I mentioned already that people can change the budget on the fly. There's a little piece of statute that says, someone has to present an audit of the lake district budget to the annual meeting. There's not a good definition for what that audit is, and don't get hung up on thinking that it means that you have to hire outside accountants to do a full-blown audit, because those can be very expensive. But it does mean that somebody has to review your budget and have a sense of like, okay, everything appears to be on the up and up. We did a review, the spending matches the revenue, things like that. But again, the people there can set that budget, and we're going to talk more in the next episode coming up in April about budgets in more detail. So I don't want to get too bogged down in this. But in terms of finances, I'm curious what lake associations do. How do you all handle questions about budget or money?
Yeah, our treasurer presents where we are financially, goes through our expenditures and any money that we may be taking in. The majority of the money that we take in are either our share of a DNR grant or membership dues, along with anybody that we leverage a couple different fundraising tools to get that kind of extra money in. And so the treasurer will report on that. And then we do an audit. And so we just have other members audit our finances. So they sit down with our finance guy, walk through the financial records, make sure it makes sense, make sure that they're accurate. And then we do present the audit report at the annual meeting.
Yeah, and our financials are presented by our treasurer at our annual meeting. And then I think our budget has previously been passed at a board meeting.
Yeah, so you have a little bit more flexibility on that, but just keeping people up to date is probably
Yes.
enough. And we'll talk a little bit more detail next chat that we have here. Next slide is really about like what else is on the agenda. Oftentimes, whether you're a district or an association, you have these subgroups, these committees that are working on specific initiatives, and the annual meeting is a chance for them to at least share how things are going, probably recruit volunteers. How do you all handle like committee reports?
Yep. So we have a Clean Boats, Clean Water Committee. We have kind of a social committee that does we do coffee on the dock or coffee on the lake, whatever. And so we have those committees present. We also have a fish habitat committee that will give an update on what projects we're going to be doing or what projects we did do and how effective they may or may not have been around our fish habitat.
Yeah, and our committees this summer we're focusing a lot on yellow flag iris, so our aquatic invasive committee will probably give a little report about that. Clean boats, clean waters, the fish sticks, because I think for a long time we all called it fish sticks and maybe nobody really knew what that meant, that it wasn't a dinner item. So we now have photographs of what was happening over the winter because people don't always see that. So we want to focus on those volunteers that do that big project. And yeah, and it's a good way to introduce our board members while they're talking about the committees that they're on.
And a lot of these that are posted here on the slide and what you all talked about, those are those programs, the things that happen, the big projects, that programmatic capacity. But there's all those other pieces of that, the organizational capacity pyramid, like volunteers or members and all the other things that need to happen to get to these programs, to make these programs happen. So you might have a fundraising committee or a volunteer committee. Dave, you mentioned the social committee. So all those other people that might not be participating possibly in the programs, the thing like the fish sticks or plantings or anything like that, but that are necessary. So all those other people that could get involved or are involved, giving them time to report out as well. And Sandy, do you have a sustainability committee?
We do. We had a committee that's name was so long that nobody wanted. It was the Sustainability and Capacity Building Committee, CBC, and no one could remember that. But it kind of shifted. I mean, it's still definitely that committee, but they have moved their efforts more towards fundraising. I mean, there was so much overlap.
Sure. And it's really to make sure that the program or that the organization continues into the future, right? And has
exactly
the funding that's needed, but also the people, like who's going to come after us and do this next.
Our next push with kind of a committee, and it's part of that SCBC committee, we're calling it Next Gen, and it's encouraging the young adults, children who are not children, but adults of members to join our organization. So they've been coming to the lake since they were little. Now they might be in their 30s, 40s. They can, you know, jump in and become members as well.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you.
A lot of these meetings, then it can seem like it's sort of the same thing over and over again. And if you've been going to them for a long time, maybe it feels that way. But one of the ways you varied up is by bringing in different folks too. So those committees obviously are giving news and sort of really hot off the press kind of updates. But oftentimes it's sort of an outside speaker, someone who's like a ringer, if you will, to draw people in. Here's just some resources, some ideas of the type of folks you're bringing in. I also wanted to point out the University of Wisconsin has a speaker catalog that you can go online and check out and maybe find someone that you want to bring in. Of course, you got to plan ahead of time. You can't just call them a couple days ahead of time and say, hey, can you come up to Washburn County or Rusk County? But if you get on top of it, you can bring out some interesting people. What has been your experience with bringing in different speakers, Sandy or
Oh,
Dave?
yeah, we have, we always give a few minutes to our first responders because we present them with the check, but they're usually very, give lots of important information to the membership about where they're located, what's on the lake in terms of a, what's that heart, I can't even think of what
AED.
it's called. Right. So where those are and who would actually come. And when you call 911, what happens and where does that call go first? So they've been great. When we can get our DNR person, it's been wonderful, but they're very busy. And usually we try in the past couple of years to find someone connected to a project we're working on. So this year it's going to be a phosphorus study. So someone's coming from an engineering firm to talk about that study.
Yeah, and we do very similar things. We haven't had presenters at the last couple of annual meetings, but we have in the past, and they are kind of an extra draw, if you will. And then we like you, Sandy, we always call out and we have a place for people to give to the first responders. And in fact, we talked about exactly the same thing, where are the AEDs and what happens if you need something like that and how do you do that? So yeah, always support the folks that are going to be the first call if you have an emergency.
And Sandy or Dave, do you bring guest speakers in before the meeting, like to kick everything off, or is it kind of after the business?
Go ahead, Sandy.
You know what? I think it's after the business. I think we get the business over and then have the speaker.
That's typically, if we have a speaker, that's when we do it too. Yep.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. All right, well then, we're almost done with this chat. Just have like two more pieces of information. But so you have this meeting, you have this annual meeting, and you want to know how did it go and what's next. It doesn't just end and stop at then when you're done with the meeting, right? So do you provide some type of evaluations, or how do you get people's feedback? And how do you then follow up with those maybe that weren't there?
Well, if they weren't there, we do offer other opportunities throughout the summer for them to catch up on what happened at the annual meeting. They can look on our website at the minutes. Again, and Dave mentioned this, like time-wise, you try not to keep people too long so they can get back to their, because you notice if they're getting rustling, the meeting's gone too long. And we do keep track of attendance. And mostly we ask people if they want to stay because there's food and they can have food as they come in, but we also encourage them to stay and find a board member that they want to talk to. So, you might have informal little group chats that happen at the end of the meeting.
Yeah. Yep. And we don't do a formal poll, but we do generally someone or they'll pull us aside. They'll maybe pull a board member aside or a committee member aside and say, hey, that was good, but could we maybe dive into this subject or something like that? Or, hey, nice job. Thanks a lot for doing this. We don't have a formal feedback tool, although I think that's kind of an interesting idea. Maybe we'll look into that. So yeah, ours is more informal, and then we do post our minutes out on our Facebook. Well, we post them on our website and links to them on our Facebook page.
Yeah, and I think, tracking attendance year to year is a good way to gauge sort of if you're on the right track. Is this meeting going well? Because if people don't show up, I mean, again, some people will be like, well, I've gone for 5 years and it's always the same old thing. Then you maybe have to have some committee meetings leading up to the meeting to think about how do we change this up? How do we make it a little more exciting? With lake districts, again, even though the budget's being decided on taxes, it's hard sometimes to get people to turn out. And I think that's where districts can borrow some ideas from lake associations to make those meetings a little bit more attractive, a little more interesting. And of course, one thing they could do is propose something dramatic in the budget. Say they're going to spend a lot of money and then they'll get a lot of people to show up and ideally amend that budget, fix it to the way they want it. But it is hard. That's a good lead into our next slide here. We are going to be talking about budgets in a little more detail on the next chat. It's kind of boring stuff maybe, but it is part of how your organizational capacity is gauged and determined, is how much money do you have to get things done? Everything from buying donuts for the annual meeting to doing the Healthy Lakes and Rivers type projects. So be sure to check that out. Sarah, did we have any other final notes too? We want to thank our guests, right?
Yes, we want to thank Dave and Sandy. Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience. But also thanks for everyone listening. If you do have feedback about potential topics, or if you enjoyed this chat, we will have an evaluation form linked in the YouTube video. So make sure you click on that, fill it out. It won't take but a couple of minutes. And we appreciate your feedback and hope you'll join us for future episodes. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.